We concluded yesterday with the return of the royal family from Varennes to Paris, where they are now prisoners in the Tuileries. They don't have free reign. In reaction to this capture of the king and his return and pseudo-imprisonment, there is some action on the part of other European monarchies. They pass or create something called the Declaration of Pillnitz. And they do this in August of 1791. It wasn't overnight. Takes them time to get together and figure stuff out. In the Declaration of Pillnitz, what you're looking at here is Emperor Leopold II of Austria. Joseph has already died. He had a fairly short life. And Frederick William II of Prussia. They're talking here. And so Austria and Prussia declared support of Louis XVI against the French Revolution. So they said, hey, we are monarchs, and he's our man. They called on European powers to intervene if Louis was threatened. Essentially, if it was clear that Louis was about to lose his life, the other European powers would intervene. This is significantly different from the last time we lost a European monarch, right? Who was that? Charles I of England. The rest of Europe kind of went, oh my goodness, but it was over so fast in Europe that they couldn't do anything. This is already drug on for a couple of years. The declaration says, in kind of fine print, that Austria will go to war only if all the other major European powers have already gone to war with France. Why would Austria make that distinction? Austria's saying, we're not going first. After you. Why would they do that? Margot? What? Other people might get mad if they didn't necessarily agree. There's a bigger reason, though. Ethan, what were you?
Well, if things start going south.
Oh, you're thinking they wanted to hold back a little bit and see how things were going? No, Margot?
Maybe because France went into debt helping so much.
France went into debt helping America. Austria didn't really care about that. That's.
So they wouldn't go into debt too.
Oh, because wars are expensive, so you think Austria's trying to save money. You're on the right track. The actual answer is that Austria doesn't actually want to go to war. They especially don't want to go to war against France. France has a pretty good army. So you make the declaration, but then you include in it an escape clause, basically. This is our way out. So we'll only do it if every other major European power does it first. And Austria had an ace in the hole here. They knew that Britain absolutely, unequivocally, period, end of sentence, does not want to go to war with France, especially to preserve Louis XVI's absolute monarchy. Why would England in 1791 be really uninterested in preserving Louis XVI's French absolutist monarchy? Gabby?
Because it's Catholic and they're...
It's not about religion this time, but that's a good guess. That's always a good go-to. Miranda?
Didn't they just war with the American colonies?
England had just had an expensive war with the American colonies, yes, so they're looking at their finances, but there's a bigger reason. Tram? What?
They're enemies.
They're enemies, so wouldn't that make them want to go to war? That's kind of an anti-reason. England in 1791 would not be interested in preserving France's absolutist monarchy because England in 1791 is a constitutional monarchy. They had gotten rid of their absolutist monarchy. They are on their third, almost fourth, almost fifth constitutional monarch. They're 50 years into this constitutional monarchy thing. It's working out all right. They think France doesn't necessarily need to preserve their frivolous little king. Austria really only agreed to the Declaration of Pillnitz because there's a group of French folks who are called émigrés. These are royalists. A royalist is someone who supports the monarchy. Are royalists really popular in France right now? No. An émigré, starting with an E, is somebody who has exited a country. Versus an immigrant, starting with an I, is someone who has come into a country. So immigrant and emigrant, E for exit, I for into. Okay? So the émigrés, when you're talking about the period of the French Revolution, émigrés are royalists who have fled France. And a lot of them went to Austria. Why would they naturally go to Austria? It's not like Austria is a next door neighbor to France. Why would the émigrés go to Austria? Because of Marie Antoinette, the queen. She's from Austria. And these royalists make the assumption that Austria will support the restoration of the French monarchy. Seems like a kind of an obvious conclusion to reach. Well, the National Assembly of France interprets the Declaration of Pillnitz a little differently. Remember, Austria and Prussia have said, we'll go to war to support Louis. Austria added that clause that they knew would prevent their declaration from ever being enacted. But France doesn't know very well that Britain won't go to war to bring Louis's crown to safety. And so the National Assembly assumes that this means Austria is going to attack them any minute now. So the National Assembly is like on alert, ready to go. War's coming. Okay? This is significant. Very shortly after the Declaration of Pillnitz, the Constitution of 1791 is adopted. This is a very liberal constitution. What is liberal?
It's very loose and it's against modern traditions. Isn't that like modern?
Well, yeah, kind of. It can be very loose. It is contrary to tradition. Think of it like this. Liberal means lots of change. On the opposite end of the political spectrum, what is opposite of liberal? Conservative. And conservative means no change, very little change. Sometimes ultra-conservatives want to go back to the way it used to be. They want to change back. So they don't view that as change. Let's go fix it the way it used to be. Okay? Who's in the middle? Moderates. So liberal, lots of change, L to L, liberal, lots of change. Conservative, keep it. It's not C to C, but it's the same sound, right? Conservative, keep it. Moderates are in the middle. Let's keep some of the stuff and let's change a little bit. How many of you have some family traditions? We're coming up on the holidays. How many of you have had the same meal for Thanksgiving or Christmas Eve or Christmas Day for your entire life? Okay, so when it comes to upholding those traditions, those of you who raise your hands, your families are conservative. How many of you used to have the same meal but changed a while ago and have kind of kept that meal since then? Okay, you guys would be moderate. A little bit of change, but still some consistency. How many of you never eat the same thing for holidays? Yeah. You guys are liberal when it comes to maintaining traditions. Are any of those groups superior to the other? No. Those of you who've never changed may value that and have no interest in changing, but it doesn't mean that you are superior to the liberals who've had something different to eat every Thanksgiving. Okay? You cannot judge them based on that. It is a different way of thinking. Okay? Now, you've got liberal, moderate, conservative, correct? If you were to put those on a line, like a number line, and we called that line the political spectrum, who would go on the left-hand side of that line? Liberals go to the left. Convenient, LL, right? Liberals to the left. Who goes to the right? Conservatives. And in the middle? Moderates. Let's relate this to our political spectrum here in the United States. Who's on the left for us? Democrats, correct. And on the right? Republicans. And in the middle? Independents, and some folks say the folks who are libertarians end up in the middle. Okay. You're going to need to know that in the coming days. We're going to get deep into the politics of the French Revolution, and the governments are going to change more frequently because of the conservatives and the liberals. And we're going to learn the different names for conservatives and liberals in French Revolution France. And yes, you're going to have to know those for the quizzes and test. Sorry. Okay, so the Constitution of 1791, what do you need to know about it? You need to know about the things it achieved or changed. It's a very liberal constitution, meaning it changed a lot. This is radical change. Guess what constitution this is? This is the constitution they pledged that they would write when they were standing on the tennis court. This is the culmination of the tennis court oath. Guess what they have made the preamble of the Constitution of 1791? What? Not the tennis court oath. The Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen. That's become the preamble to this Constitution. Okay. All right, so here are the things the Constitution of 1791 does. Simplifies the judicial system and makes it elected. The people of France are going to elect their judges and prosecutors. How did they used to be chosen? The king would pick some of his favorite nobles. How fair was that? Possibly not, depended upon who you were, which makes it pretty unfair, right? Within France, the political subdivisions of government are changed. In the United States, how is the United States broken up for government? Not division of powers. In terms of actually administering the nation, we have the federal government, state government, what kind of local government below state? Counties, then cities, okay? In France, they had France, and they had provinces. And the provinces were the equivalents of our states. They changed that. They get rid of provinces because guess who decided the provinces? The nobility. And this whole French Revolution thing is about changing it. And again, we're going to change it a lot because this is a liberal constitution. So here we go. The provinces, of which there were about 15, become 83 départements. You may write down 83 departments. 83 départements. And each of those is divided further into smaller administrative units. So if we had 83 states, each one of those states is divided further into counties. So each of those small administrative units gets its own locally elected governing council. It's like Papillion and La Vista have city councils. In Sarpy County, we have the county board. The whole idea here is to make the government accountable to the people. And if the government that's affecting your everyday life is right there and you just elected them, how responsive is that government theoretically going to be to your needs? Very responsive. Very responsive. Okay. The king remains. The king is still part of this Constitution, and he gets to appoint and dismiss his ministers at will, without anybody's approval. A new body of governance is created. Who wrote this? Who's been governing the country with the king? The National Constituent Assembly. Okay, they're going to go away now, and the new body is the Legislative Assembly. So you had the NA, well, you had the EG for the Estates General, and the EG turned into the NA for National Assembly, which turned itself into the NCA for the National Constituent Assembly. Now that has turned itself into the LA, the Legislative Assembly. And yes, you're going to have to know these in order. Lucky you guys. I'm going to create a list, a chart. Well, after the Estates General. Now, if we're going to have a new body, we're going to have to elect them, right? Well, this document changes how we're electing them. The right to vote is limited. Not everybody in France gets to vote. By the way, what's the fancy word for the right to vote? Or, that's very good, suffrage, or the franchise. If you have the right to vote, you have been granted the franchise. Okay? So if someone takes away the right to vote, they have disenfranchised you. Disenfranchise is taking away the right to vote. Okay? So some folks are going to get disenfranchised. When it comes to the right to vote, here's how they broke it down. There are two groups of people in France, active and passive. And this doesn't apply to all people. Let's be very specific. Men over 25. Or men 25 and up. Ladies, I'm sorry, you just don't matter. After all, you are just women, and your hair or your brains are filled with flowers and hair ribbons and fancy clothes and babies, and you can't be expected to think about these difficult and important matters. It might make you faint or something, so you needn't concern yourselves, not for quite a while yet. Such things could be harmful to your health, and the men are really looking out for you by not enfranchising you. Sorry. So, get over it. So, gentlemen, 25 and up will be divided into two categories: active and passive. You are an active or a passive citizen based on your wealth. Wait a minute. All of a sudden, this is not sounding quite so liberal, is it? Except, think back. Who had power on the Ancien regime? The clergy and the nobility, right? There was part of that 97% that was just as well educated as the clergy and nobility, and some of them were even wealthier. Do you remember the name for that group? It was one of our WADs. Bourgeoisie, the bourgeoisie. These folks are wealthy. Many of them own land, but they had no ability to acquire power because they couldn't get a title. So, those folks are being enfranchised by this Constitution, and that is a big change. So, you are an active citizen if you pay taxes equivalent to 3 days' wages. So you take what you earn for 3 days of work, and you turn that over in taxes, and you get the right to vote. You are a passive citizen if you don't meet the wealth requirement. But you can become an active citizen if you'll pay a voluntary tax. So just because you don't have enough wealth to automatically be an active citizen, if you can somehow get some money to pay a tax, you can buy the right to vote. Now, by our standards today, that's totally not okay, right? A lot of this isn't okay by our standards. But back then, it was at least more of an opportunity than they had had before. This is not a direct democracy. A direct democracy is where you vote directly for the person who's going to represent you. They have created what's called an indirect democracy. You will vote for electors who will then choose on your behalf the people who are going to the legislative assembly. That is how we elect our president. We elect our president by indirect election. We elect our senators and congressmen and local people by direct election. So we use a blended system in the United States. Okay. Limited male suffrage. This limited number of men only who get to vote is very common in Europe when it comes to constitutions of the 19th century. Constitutions of the 1800s. The French are a little ahead of the curve here. Go figure. Generally, men of property get to vote. There's two more things that the Constitution of 1791 changes now that we've covered the whole voting thing. Or doesn't change, really. This is a pretty conservative thing. The Constitution of 1791 in France preserves slavery and the slave trade. Why on earth? Thank you. Why on earth would it do that? Tran?
They don't view the slaves as people.
It does not have to do with the viewing the slaves as inferior. Gabby?
With the lack of slaves, the economy could crash.
Well, they don't use very many slaves in France, so it's not going to cause the economy to crash in that way. But you're warm.
For things like crops and whatnot and everything that made them money, they needed slaves to use.
Again, they're not using very many slaves in France.
In the Americas.
They have lost their land in the Americas as a result of the 7 Years' War.
Are they selling slaves?
They are engaging in the slave trade in Africa. No, they're not trading slaves for spices. They're trading slaves for profits. And why is France in this huge mess? Because they're broke. This is a pretty good, reliable source of income. So that problem has not been solved in 2 years. So guess what? The French are not above preserving the one thing that's getting them some money. So they keep slavery and the slave trade. Here's where this Constitution becomes exceptionally liberal. France enfranchises Jews with this Constitution. Now, when I say Jews, of course I am speaking about only Jewish men over 25 with enough wealth. But religion didn't matter for voting in France anymore. Jewish ladies in his house, sorry, you're still is out. Nowhere else in Europe in 1791 is allowing Jews the right to vote. So the new government, the Legislative Assembly, is created, and they will exist for almost a year. This is not a great period of duration for France. They've got some problems. Now, when France chose not to enfranchise women, there is a woman who was pretty upset. Lots of women were upset. But this woman's name is Olympe de Gouges. She wrote Declaration of the Rights of Woman and the French Citizen. Now, what does that sound like? The Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the French Citizen. She wrote that Declaration of the Rights of Woman and the French Citizen as kind of an open letter to Marie Antoinette, and she's basically saying, help us as women get the franchise. Later, when the revolution gets even more radical than it already is, Olympe de Gouges is going to be executed, not because she advocated for women to get the right to vote, but because she wrote a letter to the Queen asking for the Queen's support, and that makes her a royalist sympathizer, and for that, she must lose her head. Pretty radical lengths that the revolution gets to. It was more crazy to ask the Queen for support than it was to say women could vote. Okay. So, while women don't get the vote, the Legislative Assembly does make some changes for women. And these are significant. Eventually, they will allow all children to inherit land and wealth. Before this, only boys could inherit land and money. So the law of primogeniture, we talked about everything goes to the first son, that's gone now. This is a huge one socially. Illegitimate children and their mothers are able to sue the fathers for support. Before this time, it was all your fault, girls. If you got pregnant out of wedlock, that's your problem, deal with it. And it was kind of a, oh, boys will be boys mentality, and oh well, she shouldn't have been such a tramp kind of thing. And so you have a whole lot of destitute women and children, because boys will be boys. So now that the men could be sued for support, that changes things slightly. You still had to prove it, and of course, if you've had a child out of wedlock, what is the man's first defense going to be? How do you know it's mine? You're such a slut, you must have been sleeping with all kinds of guys, and they don't have DNA tests or paternity tests. So it was still an uphill battle, but at least they had the right to sue. Here's a big one. A wife can now initiate divorce. Before, it was only the man who could sue for divorce. And what were the grounds? Generally, alienation of affection, meaning she won't let me in the bedroom anymore. Or accusations of adultery. She won't let me in the bedroom anymore, but somebody's coming into the bedroom. So finally, women who are abused, neglected, abandoned can initiate divorce. Now, Rousseau, hero of the Enlightenment, right, came up with some great ideas. He had written that women were not fit to vote, that they should not be active citizens. When they were writing the Constitution of 1791, he wrote, women should not be active citizens because they are just childbearers and are incapable of participating in public affairs. So ladies, those of you who were liking Rousseau for some of the cool stuff he said, maybe not so much now, he was not alone. The majority of men believe this, and frankly, lots of the women at the time were all right with it and believed it as well. Okay. I just did it again, didn't I? Okay. The cult of reason is established. The cult of reason. This is an attempt to further the hits against the Roman Catholic Church and at this point all organized religion in France. The Roman Catholic Church had had so much power and so much wealth that the revolution is still flailing against it and wants to eliminate any organization that could acquire and keep that much power again. So this is an attempt to de-Christianize France. Religion is basically gone now. The Cathedral of Notre Dame in Paris is turned into a temple of reason. The people of France are now being encouraged to devote themselves to the worship of reason, logic, thinking. The cult of reason will not last particularly long because you had to be fairly literate and a high-level thinker to be able to worship reason, logic, the power to think. The uneducated, illiterate masses are like, huh? Where'd the crucifix go? I don't get it. So ultimately, the cult of reason is going to be replaced by something called the cult of the supreme being. Think about that name. The cult of the supreme being. What does that sound a lot like? Worshipping a god of some sort, yeah? A supreme being. There's a guy by the name of Karl Marx who, after this time period, is going to write a book. And in that book, he will state, religion is the opiate of the masses. Does anybody know what an opiate is? A drug. It's a drug based on opium. Anybody know what the primary effect of opium is? It makes you happy, you get relaxed, you pretty much don't care, there are no worries, there are no troubles. Okay? So, religion is the opiate of the masses. What is Marx saying? Yeah, religion is a drug that can be used to comfort people and make them forget their troubles. Okay? Karl Marx is saying, in a society that is troubled, if you allow, encourage, sustain religion, the people will not interfere with government so much because they will appeal to religion to provide solace for their troubles. So the cult of reason was an attempt to abolish religion. The masses did not get it, and so the cult of the supreme being is created, and that becomes the opiate of the masses. People need somewhere else to deposit their troubles, is what Marx is saying, and religion provides that. we're going to stop here for today.